Hey everybody, today I'm hoping to give you a little bit of perspective on plant vigor. And vigor is a word that I throw around a lot when I'm talking about these premium plants. I talk about their vigor, their size, how big they get. And I think it's going to be really important that instead of just talking about it, today I want to give you some visuals so that you can actually picture what Corey's talking about when he says vigor. And this became very obvious to me this weekend. I visited a couple different garden centers and I got to watch how people shop. And it became very obvious to me that in these garden centers, like most of the plants that you get quite often are in this quart size. So this is the most popular size for most of your plants. But the big thing that's different is that they're all in the same size pot, but they're very different plants. So in this situation, like this is a dahlia. Well, if I see it like this and I see it next to a begonia, I see it next to an impatient, I see it next to a calibrachoa, I see it next to all these other plants, it's really hard for me to get my head around the idea that this dahlia is very different from other dahlias. And this is another size that's kind of popular. It's an even smaller container. The plant's even smaller, but this plant actually gets bigger than this one. And so, if I was putting these in here, it just doesn't always click. Now, if I read the tags, this one gets to, I think it's 14 to 18 inches. Well, right now it's at like 4 inches tall. So it's got a lot of growing to do. So we really need to look at those tags. And then just to give you just first some perspective here, this one I think is at 16 inches. So it still has a lot of growing to do. Remember, this is May or middle of May in northern Michigan. We're very early in our season. This plant is going to fill out more wide. It's going to get taller. We're going to see more leaves as we go through. And a lot of times, if they're really well cared for, plants like this dahlia will get even bigger than what we expect. So take a look at the difference here. This plant is going to get this size or bigger. We got to keep that in mind when we're thinking about what we're going to plant. Also, it means sometimes you're buying too many plants, because if you're just trying to fill a pot so that there's no dirt showing, you could be making a really big mistake. So you need to think about that size. I'm going to give you some other examples that are going to be even more kind of important that you're thinking about. So if I was going in, now this is a Figaro dahlia, or a redskin dahlia, but a lot of times I see the Proven Winners Mystic Illusion dahlia. It's about this size, even sometimes a little smaller. It'll be in a Proven Winners pot or whatever, but it would look kind of like this. Well, that plant gets huge, and I'm going to show you the size that we sell it in, and that might give you a little perspective on things. So this one here, let's see, I'll grab this one. So if I'm selling it, I'm selling it in this size. So you might see it in your store looking similar to this. This is a different plant, but it would look a lot like this. Meanwhile, this is what you'd see from us. But wait, this is only staying this size because it's in this gallon pot. Let me show you what it looks like when it gets into an even bigger pot. Okay, so here's my dahlia here, but take a look at this one over here. This one is in a much larger container. They were planted at exactly the same time. This is one plant, this is one plant, and this is only getting started. It's gonna get even bigger. And the only reason why it's getting this size is because we're giving it a lot of extra space. So for people who kind of lament the prices of plants, because the price of plants has been going up, it is getting expensive, you can strategize by picking some of the right plants like the Mystic Illusion dahlia and some other different varieties. You can get a lot more bang for your buck by giving it just a little more room, or you can make your money go farther, because instead of putting this with a bunch of other plants, those petunias or those calibrachoas or impatiens or whatever you're going to stick in with this, you can put them in another container, and you're going to really expand what you have in your garden, because this one can hold its own just in a pot, just the way it is. So I just want you to see this. I have some other examples too. Like when we look at petunias, there's some really good examples that I can give you right there. So I'll start with this container here. So for mid-May in Michigan, this is a pretty good size container. It's got Supertunias in it, which is a very vigorous variety. And by that, I mean they're getting big. The nature of the Supertunias is that they're going to kind of grow out, and they kind of grow like a little shelf for a little while, and then all of a sudden they start to trail, and then they cover the pot, and they just keep going and going all season long. These are those big giant balls of color. If you went on the Proven Winners website and you found a recipe with, say, Supertunia Vistas or just Supertunias in a 14-inch container like this, they would probably recommend 5 plants. We didn't put 5 plants in here. And remember, this is still early on, but this one actually only has 3 plants. So it has one of the Supertunia Vista Paradise and 2 of the Supertunia Vista Silverberry. And already we're seeing, number one, a good mix with the colors. So you can see how it's, they're intertwined together. So it's not looking like, halvesies or blotches or anything like that. We did this by putting the one in the middle and then one on each side. So if you would have seen this a month ago, you would have been like, this is kind of weird. It's kind of growing like a loaf of bread. It didn't take long though. Once they started to fill in, it just filled right out and you lose that weird shape and it just starts filling out the pot exactly the way this is. So you can get away with only 3 plants instead of 5. Now, if I had 5 plants, I wouldn't have had that loaf of bread shape for a couple of weeks. But hey, I'm patient. I can deal with it. I'm going to get to this point pretty easily. I'm going to surprise you a little bit more because here's another basket. This one has the Petunia Picasso in purple. And so when you look at this one, you're kind of like, okay, great flower coverage. This is one of those petunias that people either love it or hate it because it has that green edge on it. It's a really interesting one, really vigorous one. Normally, I think if we found a recipe, it would probably put 5 in this 12-inch. Maybe it would put less. Do you know how many plants are in here? There's 1 Petunia Picasso in purple, and this is only getting started. It will cover this pot. It will trail down 1. I mean, 1. Like, this is crazy. And this is what I mean when I talk about buying premium plants or buying vigorous plants. And it's not just the Petunias. There are a lot of other vigorous petunias out there. There's the Wave, Headliner, oh gosh, Flower Showers, Funhouse, Sanguna. Gosh, I mean, the list goes on and on. And these are all really good varieties, good flower coverage. They are self-cleaning, so you don't have to do any deadheading on them. You can if you want to, but you certainly don't have to. So when you're shopping around, instead of those 5 plants in here, you can get 1, and pretty much you could have 5 baskets for the price of 1 if you really kind of planned it out right and really looked at those tags, looked at what the maximum was, and you were patient. Because again, for a month or month and a half, this looked like a little plant in a big pot. And then suddenly, once it took off, it just went crazy. Now, it is important if you want to maximize this, number 1, that they have enough room in the pot so that the roots can develop, because this plant will not get this big if it can't grow and it can't have a lot of root and get all that nourishment. Also needs a lot of fertilizer and consistent watering. So we don't let our petunias usually dry out. They can handle dry out, but they usually don't look this good if they do. Or if you're constantly going really wet and then really dry, or just always really wet, they don't like that. They like that just kind of consistent moisture in there, and you'll get these results. So please, folks, before you start, screaming about the price of plants, think about this and think about how you can maybe save, and that way you can make that money go even farther. I'm going to probably be saying this like 100 times in this video because I really want people to understand that. You don't have to just keep buying and buying and buying. You don't have to follow the rules. Because a lot of those recipes that you'll see people doing, those are intended to look good sooner. So, you plant them out and in 2 weeks they look fantastic, or 3 weeks they look fantastic. This one, you got to wait a little longer, but it's so worth it. And it's also so much easier to take care of. We definitely find that the more space they have in the pot to grow, the less water they need. They tend to just take the fertilizer as they need it. It's just a lot easier on our part, and we don't do anything with these. We don't have to clean them. We will go underneath, and sometimes we'll look and see if, if there's any dead leaves or anything like that. If it needs, if there's one section that's growing out of control, we trim it back. But we really don't fuss with these very much at all. So for my next example, I'm going to use Coleus. So it's pretty common to see Coleus in this size. So, looks fine. You get a good sense of what the leaves look like. But there are a lot of very vigorous varieties of Coleus. So if you're getting a vigorous variety, you do want to think about that as you're planning where you're going to put it. So I'm going to show you with one of the pots that I had planted up as an example from a Proven Winners recipe. Wait till you see this. So this one here is that container that I had potted up, and I said, whoa, that's really way too many plants in it. And so this is, I think, the one that was, a 15-inch pot, and their recommendation was a 14-inch, and it had 1 Coleus, 1 Lantana, and 1 Helianthus, or a branching sunflower in it. And their recipe called for double this amount. I mean, take a look at this, folks. I mean, this is completely full. And these plants are just getting started. So all 3 of these plants are going to at least double in size, maybe even get bigger than that. This Coleus gets huge. The sunflower gets gargantuan. The Lantana, just falls over the edge, and, got these beautiful big flowers on it. This is so beautiful. And I think if I would have put the amount that the recipe called for, it actually wouldn't be doing as well as it is, because all of those plants will be competing for the nutrients and for the soil. And at some point during the season, either I'm not going to be able to keep it watered, or it's just going to kind of peter out, or it's going to just be stagnant. This one, I think, is going to just keep going, and it's going to really maximize these plants. So I'm so happy. So think about it. I mean, this one here is what you might find in the store. And this here, and honestly, this is still pretty small for this type of Coleus. Now remember, Coleus does come in different sizes. So you could be getting a micro Coleus, or you could be getting one of these giant ones. So you do want to check those tags, but just keep that in mind, because look how full this is. I totally broke the rules, only did half as many plants, and I'm so glad I did, because if I would have even put one more Lantana in here, I think it would have just taken up space that I didn't need to. I think it's going to make up for it with its vigor on this side. Again, this is a very vigorous variety of Lantana, though. If I was getting a real compact variety, then I would want to, because it's not going to have that flower action and that growth action that I really want to see on this. So folks, I hope these visuals are helping, because I do want you to understand you can get a lot of bang for your buck out of these. So let's move on to the next plant. For my last example, I'm going to use Salvia. So this is a variety called Sally Fun. This is the pure white, also available in a blue. And this is not one of our biggest Salvias, but it gets a good size. I think it's 18 to 22 inches or something like that. Maybe a little bigger than that, 24 inches. So it gets a decent size, but there are other varieties of Salvia that get even bigger. And like this one here is the Rockin' series from Proven Winners. And when you buy it, if you get it in a quart, it's going to probably look very similar to this as far as size. It's going to have just a couple branches, and you're going to think, oh, won't that be cute with the geranium? Or shouldn't I put that just with that little begonia on the side, that one begonia that I love that can take full sun? And then suddenly you get it in there and this just takes off. If you have it in a big enough pot, I find that this one just will get huge. It'll get way past the size on the tag if it has enough room in the pot to grow really good roots. Also find that in a bigger pot, it's a lot easier to maintain the moisture. So in a small pot, I find that a lot of times they dry out, and then I water them, and then they're really wet for a while, then they dry out again, and it's back and forth, back and forth. And a lot of times those plants don't do as well. When it comes to the Salvia, when it comes to petunias, lots of our other plants, as long as we're not overwatering these big pots, and we're just kind of making sure, like I a lot of times just put my finger in there and go, oh, it's still pretty damp or pretty moist in there. I'm gonna wait and water it when it gets a little bit drier, but I never let it completely dry down. That's like the perfect conditions for these plants, and they just get so much better flower coverage, I think, when they do that, and that consistency is just really, really good for them. So I just want to make sure and get this point across that you need to think about kind of making your plants work a little harder, because these new varieties are bred to be bigger, to have more flowers, and to do more work. So let them do their job. You don't have to follow the instructions for like the quick fix where, you know, plant lots of things in a little bit of area and then they'll get really big really fast and then they just stay there. You can, you know, put fewer in there, wait just a little longer, and a lot of times it's only 2 weeks that you're waiting where it doesn't look quite as good. At the max, I'd say it's even 3, and then suddenly they look fantastic and they're a lot less work, because also we tend not to have to clean the ones that have more room in the pot. I'm not sure what the science is behind that. It might have to do with that dry down period. It might have to do with less, you know, plants kind of drying out in the same way. I don't know what it is, but they're just so much easier than the ones that we keep in the smaller pots. So I'm just saying, put them in bigger pots, put fewer plants in there, and let them do the work, and you'll be rewarded. I really do promise you on that. Just make sure that you're looking for those varieties that are recommended, that are more vigorous, that are strong varieties. Bedding plants are not going to do that. So when you're looking at your little 6-packs, most of those don't. So, you know, don't fool yourself into thinking you're getting this great deal because I got 6 plants for the price of one of these, when actually those 6 plants basically end up equaling one of these in the end sometimes. Not always the case. Like I know, like the wave petunias a lot of times are available in smaller packs, and that's a good petunia as far as, you know, taking up space and really getting big. But again, you're starting small, and so you're probably one of those people who's willing to wait for those bedding plants to get bigger. So if you're willing to wait for those, you should be willing to wait for these kind of bigger, better varieties. And again, I used a lot of Proven Winners examples, but there's a lot of other varieties out there. So do a little homework or ask at your local garden center, and they'll be able to direct you to those easier care, bigger, more vigorous varieties, the ones that last all season, not the ones that are going to peter out once it gets hot or once it starts getting a little cooler at night or anything like that. They'll be able to point you in the right direction. So thank you guys for watching. I would love to hear what plants you've put in your pots or in the ground or in the landscape. And also, all the plants that I mentioned today can go in the landscape as well. So they're not just for pots. Just remember, fertilizing is key. Consistent water is also the other thing, and making sure that they have the appropriate amount of light. So if you can get those things under control, your plants are going to give you a lot more. So again, leave some comments. Let me know what plants are kind of your big performers and the ones that you really feel that you're getting great value for the price when you do them. So go ahead, put those down there, and I will see you guys all very, very soon.